Welcome, everyone. We still have people trickling in, and I expect we'll have a lot more people as we go along. But thank you for being here on time. And my name is Rukmini. I'm joining in from India in Mumbai. And on behalf of all of us in the organizing team, I welcome you to this webinar with Erik Solheim. We will, of course, know a little more about him shortly, but before we get started, I'd like for us to get oriented technically a little bit, given that we are expecting large numbers of people. We want to make sure that we don't have any technical glitches as we go along. Yeah, and we still have people coming in, chiming in on the chat as well. Thank you for starting that off. Please do continue to introduce yourself on chat. We'd love to know where you're joining in from and anything else that you'd like to share about yourself. Given the number of people that we expect will join in, you would have noticed that we have disabled the unmuting option for all of you, just so that no one accidentally unmutes themselves and disrupts the flow of the meeting. Chat is on right now. Once Erik begins to speak, we will, for a short while, till he completes his inputs, we will disable chat so that all of us could focus on what Erik has to say. And then we will start enabling chat again once Erik is done, about halfway through this webinar. And that's when all of us can put in our questions on the chat. And of course, we cannot promise to take up all the questions that come in, but we will attempt to maximize our time with Erik. So, and of course, please reach out to any of us who are hosts on the chat at any point in time if you need support. So with that, welcome once again, and Rafal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rukmini. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Rafał Pankowski, and I have the pleasure and the honor to welcome you on behalf of this session's organizers, including the Never Again Association and the Minorities for Peace initiative. These initiatives are based in Eastern Europe, respectively in Poland and Moldova. Also on behalf of Exult Solutions from India. Also on behalf of the Rotary Peace Fellows Alumni Association, we are joined by Kathy from Kenya. And last but not least, I want to welcome everybody on behalf of the newly formed Makerere Rotary Passport Club, of which I'm also a proud member, responsible for diaspora activities. So we are a broad and diverse group of organizers, and importantly, we are a broad and diverse group of participants today, coming from all corners, literally all the continents of the world, waiting to hear from Mr. Erik Solheim, who will be introduced in a minute. Well, like I said, the participants, as we know from several hundreds registrations, we are very diverse, coming from many places, many backgrounds, both geographical and professional. So we have academics, we have practitioners, we have grassroots activists, as well as diplomats in our group. So we hope this conversation to be a space for critical engagements on the basis of the different experiences we bring to the conversation. we have friends and colleagues from Uganda, Rwanda, Nigeria. On the list, I see South Asia, our friends from Bangladesh, our friends from India, also from South Caucasus, Armenia. So many, many past and current conflict zones as well. So I think it is also appropriate to mention we are meeting on a meaningful day. It is a day of important anniversaries, including the International Day of Reflection on the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. It is also an anniversary of the 1903 pogrom in Kishinev, another important date in world history. We live in an age of growing, rising, aggressive authoritarianism and imperialism, represented by what many people would call the twin monsters of Putinism in Russia and Trumpism in the US. And it seems we are really desperate for a positive vision, a vision of hope for peace and dialogue, a light in the tunnel. And I very much hope that this session is going to contribute in a modest way to a sense of positivity under such difficult circumstances. So let me just give you a quick overview of the program for today. Natalia will introduce the speaker, and she's going to sketch out a frame of our conversation today. Then before Natalia, I apologize. Before Natalia, Kati Doherty will say words of welcome on behalf of the Rotary Peace Fellowship Alumni Association. Natalia, after that, is going to introduce the speaker, who will give a lecture for about 30 minutes. Then we are going to spend a few minutes on a small group discussion, and after that we are going to open the floor for Q&A. So the space will be open for questions and comments from all the participants. So now I would like to pass the floor and the virtual mic to Katie, joining us from Nairobi, please.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'm the Rotary Peace Fellow Alumni Association president and treasurer. I have the honor of being both. But on behalf of the association, I want to welcome everybody. The association is huge. We have over 1,800 Rotary Peace Fellow alumni members, and our job, the association's job, is to support them as they continue to become peace builders and change makers right after the Peace Fellowship. So I want to welcome Erik as well. I had the chance of seeing an interview with him the other day. So I know you're all in for a treat. You're going to learn a lot in this session today. So thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Now I would like to give the floor to Natalia Sinaeva, who initiated our meeting today on behalf of Minorities for Peace. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rafal. Thank you very much, Rukmini, and thank you very much, Kati, for joining and supporting the event. So we are organizing it together. And I'd like just to start by saying that today it's not an isolated event, and it is a part of our conversation about power, agency, and negotiations. And it is actually a continuation of a previous lecture and conclusions drawn from our conversation with Swiss Ambassador Walter Gager in February, when we learned that a negotiation not necessarily determine outcomes, but they shape conditions, and moral clarity is not leverage. And all options should be open in negotiations, and timing sometimes matters more than intention. It's also a link to my own recent experience in advocacy case that I and my colleagues are involved, where I learned that power often hides behind procedure and it doesn't say direct no. It can delay, it can promise, but doesn't say direct no, rejection. And even if experienced mediators, top mediators involved, they can also have limits, and influence doesn't automatically translate into outcomes. And timing often can matter more than justice, and decision can be postponed, waiting for political moments such as elections or change of a power. So the question is not only how a negotiation works, but how, when they're possible at all. And it is exactly the questions that we want to explore today. And this was inspired me to invite you also with my colleagues for this session today. And before giving the floor to our speaker, we want to acknowledge that this issue we are discussing today, wars, mass violence, genocide, political failures, are not abstract because they involve real people, they involve real stories, real suffering, and for some personal or professional experience that may be difficult. And times individuals have tried to negotiate, even with such extreme conditions. And I know from history of Eastern Europe, as I'm coming from Moldova, living in Poland, and I know history of the Second World War and the Holocaust, as in the case, for example, of Raoul Wallenberg, who used negotiation, protection documents for Jews during the Holocaust, and personal intervention to save thousands of Jews during the Holocaust. But such examples also remind us how limited and exceptional these possibilities are. And our speaker today has spent decades working at the highest levels of mediation, not only at the moments of success and progress, but in various situations, in situations where progress was uncertain, delay, or didn't happen at all. And in our previous conversation with Walter Gager, we explored how to act within limits. And today we are going forward, and we would like to discuss to what happens when those limits don't just constrain action, but block it. And sometimes influence doesn't look like action. It looks like contributing to a process whose effects will only become visible much later. So I would like also to welcome Erik Solheim, and I would like to give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia, and a very good afternoon, morning, evening to all of you. I'm so blessed to speak to and with people from, I understand, all continents of the world. Just this afternoon, I spoke to people from Uganda, from India, from Poland, and from many other parts of the world. So very good morning. I'm speaking to you from France, so I should say bonjour. Look, quite often I'm giving lectures to Norwegian military leaders at the Norwegian War Academy, and I very often start with a quiz, and that is, who is the most brilliant military leader of all of history? They will normally come up with some recent examples, say General Eisenhower from the Second World War or General Zhukov from the Second World War, but I tell them that probably the greatest leader of all wars of all human history is a person you have never heard of, and that's Subodh. Subodh was the main general of Genghis Khan, who conquered nearly all of the then known world. He won battles from Hangzhou in China to Kiev in Europe, and he won every single battle. he was into, and it was more than 70 of them. Why was Subodh so brilliant? For two reasons. He, of course, was a genius of war, for sure, a personal genius. As his leader, Genghis Khan, also was a genius of war. But they also come from a background where war was inevitable. Because Genghis Khan's wife was, for example, stolen by another tribe. If he wanted to have her back, he could only get her back by military means, by attacking that tribe and conquer her back, or he could attack another tribe to get another wife. That was the option if you wanted to survive on the Mongol steppes back in the 1200s. If someone come and stole your sheep, well, you had to steal some other sheep, otherwise you would simply die. There was no way of surviving without sheep, and hardly possible to survive without a wife either. So a background which made war close to inevitable, but then the personal character of the people also mattered. And that is the case today as well. Background factors matters for war. Poverty makes war most likely, mainly because it's much easier to recruit soldiers in the case of war. I tell my children that, oh wow, I have a fantastic offer to you, 2 hot meals a day and a Kalashnikov. Well, I mean, of course, they will just laugh. But if you give that offer to a poor person at the marketplace in Sudan, it may not be such an offer, and people may take that offer. Environment catastrophes also makes war most likely. For example, you will have much more refugees. Refugees will have to go somewhere, and that will create conflicts. Weak states make also conflicts much more likely. Consider the fact that India has largely been at peace for 80 years, while the neighboring states of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Myanmar, and Nepal all have had civil wars of different sorts. Why? Well, India is a much stronger state where the government leaders can impress upon the people their will without taking into account every rebel group. And ethnic diversity may also cause wars, but there is no simple direction here. India is probably the most complicated ethnic state on planet Earth, and as I said, has largely been at peace. While, for instance, our neighbor back home here in Norway, Finland, had one of the most severe civil wars in European history, with an enormous high death rate in one of the most ethnically homogeneous societies on Earth. So poverty, environment destruction, weak states, ethnic diversity, all these may be background factors for war, but wars are always initiated by war entrepreneurs. They may do it for good reasons or for just evil reasons, but without the war entrepreneurs, wars will never happen. These war entrepreneurs may be presidents, guerrilla leaders, terrorist chiefs, generals, but it's human agency which starts war. Think of the largest war in human history, the most deadly war in human history, the Second World War. That war is simply unthinkable, except for one person, Adolf Hitler. There could have been other wars in Europe without Hitler, but it could never have been the Second World War, because no other leader, no other even official in the Nazi party, had the idea of wiping out 6-7 million Jews and making all Poles and Ukrainians and Russians servants to Germany, even killing tens of millions of them. That was the idea of Hitler. He got the power in Germany, and then he could embark upon these ideas. And most of the people who supported him would, under normal circumstances, have been completely normal owners of small shops, professors at universities, drivers, civil servants in Germany or Austria, unless they had this evil leader who drove them into war. Franz Stangl, you can read about him in the fantastic book about him. He was the commander of the Treblinka. He had nothing, no background of evil before he came there. In a normal life, he would have been a normal civil servants in Austria, taking his children to soccer matches and playing piano and reading books, and no one would have taken notice of him, but there would have been no evil either. So it construct of the war entrepreneurs which brings war. Rwanda is another example of that. I mean, the perception in Europe, which was very racist simply, was that this was kind of a spontaneous attack of Hutus against Tutsis in Rwanda, and that showed the backwardness of Rwandan society. To the contrary, the genocide against Tutsis and many also moderate Hutus was very well organized. The main perpetrator was not a villain from some crazy tribe. He was the chief of staff of the Rwandan army, one of the most educated persons in Rwanda, Theoneste Bagasora. He passed away a few years ago in Mali in prison because of his crimes. But it was the crime of a well-adapted, intelligent person who wanted to go for this complete all-out crime. So if we want to stop wars, we need to focus on the war entrepreneurs. I will give you 5 lessons from my dealings with some of them. Some people may think you shouldn't speak to war entrepreneurs and evil people. I take the exact opposite opinion. It's even more important to speak to them, because if we cannot defeat them militarily, we need to speak to them to find compromises and end wars. I was very deeply involved in Sri Lanka in particular, but also in Nepal, Sudan, Burundi, and Myanmar. So I speak on that background, but also as a person who has taken a lot of interest in reading about wars in every other part of the world and history. Well, rule number 1, go to the veranda. If you want to solve a problem, you must focus on the main issues. This phrase is made by a person called Bill Urey, who's professor at the Harvard University and a very, very deep student of wars and mediation. And he said this is the most important rule, and we learn a lot from it. Go to the veranda, look out over the landscape, focus on the big issues, not on the details. In wars, people tend to be focused on the detail of the day, the humiliation of the other party, what the other party did yesterday, rather than on the big issue stuff. In the Vietnam negotiations in Paris, we were stuck for quite some time, and there was a discussion about the shape of the negotiation table. Should it be round? Should it be 2 sides, 4 sides? What should be the shape? Everyone understands that had no direct impact on the war in Vietnam. It was a symbolic issue, but it was the focus. Try to avoid these kind of diversions and go to the veranda, look to the big issues. In Sri Lanka, for example, when we opened the talks between the Tamil Tigers, who did fight for a separate homeland for the Tamils in Sri Lanka, and the government of Sri Lanka, we were overwhelmed with these kind of issues. Who should speak first during the negotiations? Who should have the foremost seat at the table? Should there be flags? All these kind of small issues. They had all a symbolic value. For example, if the government accepted the Tamil Tiger flag, it could be seen as an indication that the government agreed that there were 2 entities in Sri Lanka, the state of Sri Lanka and the Tamil Tigers, and of course they wouldn't agree to that. If one party was speaking before the other, it could be seen as that party was the more privileged. At the end of the day, these talks were done in Thailand. And the Thai government, they abided by the rules of diplomacy, which was that the state will always come first. But we negotiators knew that we could not always put the state first, because that will not make the equal participation of the parties. So the Tamil Tigers needed to get the respect and dignity and privilege of being at the equal level with the government, even if it was not equal to a sovereign state. So the Thais at this opening session, they accepted that I personally could go around and organize everything, decide who will sit where, what kind of badges there would be, who will speak first, and we agree that there will be no flags, because if we cannot agree to have 2 flags, there can be no flags. But the main point here is not the details, because they differ from one conflict to the other. but the main issues focus on the big issues, those who will define whether you can find a solution. And that's again the slogan, go to the veranda. And second lesson is also very obvious. There is no shortcut. If you don't want to take the time to understand a conflict or to understand another country, maybe you should not wage a war against that country. Sun Tzu, the Chinese genius of wars 2000 plus years ago, he said you need to know the enemy and you need to know yourself. I now see a president of the United States of America, Donald Trump, who has waged a war against Iran, and he doesn't seem to have the slightest interest in understanding or learning anything about Iran. Look, Iran is a people of 93 million people, 3 times the number of Vietnamese which were in Vietnam at the time when the United States attacked Vietnam. So it's not a small country. It's a very, very topographically difficult country. And it's one of the oldest civilizations on planet Earth. A very, very proud people, which are very proud of being Iranian. They're also proud of being Shia Muslims. They have a lot of pride, and are not likely to bend to the will of someone outside. There's no signal whatsoever that there is anyone in the room who makes the decisions in Washington with any knowledge of Iran. Not one. Look, that was exactly the same mistake the United States did when they went to war in Vietnam. It was acknowledged afterwards by everyone, also those who waged that war in Vietnam, that in the room there was no one who had understanding of Vietnam. No one who knew the history, the pride, the strength of the Vietnamese people. No one understood how nationalistic they were. It was all seen through the global lens of communism, as if communism is the same everywhere in the world, and no real knowledge of Vietnam. And then again, the United States repeated the mistake in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and now seems to be again immune against learning and wanted to make exactly the same mistake in Iran. Look, it's not just the United States which act like this. Every indication is that Mr. Putin thought he would occupy Kyiv in 72 hours, but the Americans also thought he would occupy Kyiv in 72 hours. He didn't also take the trouble to try to understand Ukrainian nationalism. Or in the case of my nation, Norway, probably the most important involvement of a war by my nation, Norway, was the bombing of Libya. It was one of the nations which bombed Libya the most to get rid of Mr. Gaddafi, the Libyan leader. I was in the room when these decisions were made. Because I was in the government at the time. I was frankly the only person in the government who said this may not be a good idea because we know nothing about Libya. There was not one person in the room with any knowledge of Libya. I don't think there is one person in Norway at all with any notion of Libya. But we never bring someone from, I don't know, from Paris or from London or from New York, or not to speak about from Tripoli or Benghazi, who could tell us, inform us about Libya. So we made every mistake in the book. We destroyed Libya with not being able to bring in a better government. And we have not just destroyed Libya, we have created a paradise for jihadists, Islamic extremists, all over North Africa, to such an extent that these Islamists are now much stronger in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and other nations, thanks to the completely unnecessary and horrible bombing by Norway and other nations in Libya, which again was based on absolutely zero knowledge about Libya. And this disaster must be stopped. We must, if you want to wage war against a nation, please try to understand that nation. And maybe it's better to avoid it, as in the case of Iran, which is such a strong nation, which there is no way the United States can only escalate and escalate and escalate. It would be horrible for the United States, even worse for Iran, but also very, very bad for the rest of the world. But if you do have no knowledge, you are likely to repeat mistakes. Third lesson is always look for the compromise. Please love compromise. Very often during my peace talks, people came to me and said, oh, I'm so strong. I gave nothing in the last round of negotiations. Then, of course, I asked, But did the other side give anything if you gave nothing? And the answer again was obvious. No one got anything, because you don't give, you won't get either. And every unit under the sun needs compromise. If the father in a family, or the mother for that matter, but if the father is more likely, decide to make every decision in the family, decide what you will have for dinner every night, decide where you will go for holiday, decide what kind of programs you will watch on TV, decide who the children will marry, what education they will take, simply make every decision in the family. We all know it's a disaster for that family. A family is a compromise unit between the man and the wife, but of course also with the children. When they reach a certain age, compromises must be found, otherwise the unit will simply disintegrate. Same applies to a small sport club, but even of course it applies to every nation in the world, and it implies to the world community. We need to find compromises. And I believe that in all major conflicts of today, we can largely see the compromise. It's very difficult to get there, but we can see the compromise. Iran must find a way to avoid nuclear weapons, because that we cannot have more nations in the world with nuclear weapons. The fact that Israel and other smaller nations have acquired nuclear weapons, North Korea, should not be an argument that new nations should do it, because that will make the world much more dangerous. But on the other hand, that was the agreement which was reached between the United States and Iran some times back. So an agreement on that should be possible. And then, of course, Iran must be restored to the global community, and must get economic sanctions so that it can grow its economy. And now it may even need to get some kind of influence on the Hormuz Strait, otherwise it may not go back to war, because it's in a much stronger position now than Iran was before the war. But we can see the contours of a compromise between the United States and Iran, and hopefully Pakistan, Turkey, China and other nations Oman can make that compromise happen. Same with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is no end result without a separate state for Jews and another state for Palestinians. The number of Jews is a little bit higher than the number of Palestinians, but there are two large communities, and you cannot continue over time an apartheid system. There must be equal rights for both, and then that can only happen in two separate states, but they can live together in peace, as people who have been into war in the past could do. France and Germany was at the loggerheads for many years. Now they are the best of friends. There's no reason to believe that Palestinians and Israelis, given other circumstances, cannot live together. In Sudan, a national compromise government, including all the different factions, is obviously possible. And if you look to Ukraine, a stop at the war, probably at the front lines, should be the main part of a compromise. But of course, I cannot sit there and dictate the compromise, just to argue that we must always look for compromise. And we must unfortunately accept that very often compromises are messy. As I understood, do not enjoy President Trump's policies in Iran, but in Afghanistan he got it right. He was the person who understood that it was better to end the war in Afghanistan in a messy, bad way than to continue. If the liberal global establishment had got it their way, we would still have fought a war in Afghanistan, because they would have not have seen a just peace, a good peace in Afghanistan, and they would have continued over decades the war to look for that perfect peace, which would never come. Only Trump understood that a messy peace is better than continued war. Now, the example of such a messy peace is the peace in Korea. When Dwight Eisenhower became the president of the United States in 1953, he immediately stopped the war in Korea. They stopped the war at the 38th parallel, and still that's the dividing line between North and South Korea. The Koreans is one people. They should unify at some point, but this messy peace between North and South Korea is still much, much better than continued war. I see no one who's arguing that the peace in Korea is so bad that we should go back to war. So a messy peace is better than a war. That also means that the idea about just peace, of course, is the ideal, but very rarely possible, because just peace normally means that it's just to me, but then not so just to the others. And if you want peace, you need to engage with the leaders of the day, even if you don't like them. For example, it's not obvious that the International Criminal Court helps the process towards peace. If Putin is to be brought before the International Criminal Court after a peace deal in Ukraine, would he be very eager to do it? Or would Netanyahu be very eager to do a peace deal in Gaza if his next step was to be brought to the International Criminal Court? It's much more important to get peace than to get justice for all those, because the best service you can do to all those who have given their life is to make sure that not more people will need to give their lives. In Vietnam, the United States of America continued the war 7 years after they knew they had lost, because then President Richard Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger believed that they needed to have an honorable peace. They never got the honorable peace, and more than 1 million Vietnamese and more than 25,000 Americans died after they knew they had lost the war in their search for an honorable peace rather than just a peace. They got nothing, and at the end was a complete disaster for the United States and no honorable peace. If they accepted a messy peace in 1968, again, between 1 and 1.5 million Vietnamese would still have been alive, and 25,000 American families would not have found their loved ones at this huge inscription of names in Washington. Fourth rule, you need to engage with basically everyone. True, there are some wars which can only end by total victory for one side. I can see no way there could be a compromise with Hitler, because his war aim was to take complete global power and to destroy and make Eastern Europe colonies and to wipe out all Jews of Europe. There was no compromise possible with that. Similarly, it's hard to see a compromise in the American Civil War. As then President Abraham Lincoln said, if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. And no real compromise was impossible, because the United States could not continue, as again Lincoln said, half free and half slave. So there are a few such wars, but nearly all wars are of a different character. Compromises are possible, even with evil leaders who you may not like. So I strongly believe we should avoid all these crazy ideas about, say, you can talk to terrorists, for example, which was fashionable at some point. Even if the United States didn't live up to that, they said you should not talk to terrorists, and then they went out talking to terrorists whenever they found that useful. So it was not really true, but it was a slogan which many people believed in. You need to talk to everyone: terrorists, guerrilla leaders, war leaders, presidents, even whether they are nice and good, because some wars are run by nice and good people, or evil and horrible. You need to talk to them. During the Sri Lankan war, of course, I always got this request: how can you talk to Mr. Prabhakaran, who was the leader of the Tamil Tigers, and he was one of the most efficient leaders of suicide warriors in world history. Mr. Prabhakaran killed one prime minister of India, Rajiv Gandhi, one president of Sri Lanka. He nearly killed another one. He killed a defense minister, opposition leader, a foreign minister. A huge number of other leaders in Sri Lanka were killed by suicide cadres under his command. Still, talking to him was critical, because there was no other way you could have tried to establish peace. He was the leader. It was not a council of people who made the decisions. He made the decisions. If you couldn't bring him along to peace, there could be no peace. So I always ask myself, what do the victims of this war want me to do? And I come to the conclusion they wanted to speak to him, because only he can make peace. The government leaders were not angels either, and you needed to speak to them as well. How do you speak to a leader who do so many violent acts? Well, you need to try to get to understand him, understand his perspective of the world, try to understand what he's really interested in. In the case of Prabhakaran, he was interested in movies. We brought him some movies. That was the time we still had video cassettes, so we could bring some video cassettes of movies which he was interested in. He was interested in cooking, so we talked about cooking. I tried to help his daughter to get a seat at the University of Dublin, which they wanted to, and very, very kindly the University of Dublin and the Irish government said, we have no objections, she can come. She's not responsible for acts of her father, so we'll take her, no problem. So we tried to see how we could get closer in touch with him. Fortunately, at the time, we were denied access to him by the government of Sri Lanka. I think that was a huge mistake, because the more interaction you could have with him and the more different people you could interact with him, the more likely peace would have been. Look, he nearly only spoke to Tamils, hardly even to Sinhalese, the other main group in Sri Lanka, to Indians, to Europeans. I mean, I was by far the non-Tamil who met him the most often, but he just spoke to Tamils, and nearly all of them just said, you are the god of the Tamils. You are the fantastic leader. You are our genius. We adore you. And he got no advice, which he didn't want to hear. Only foreigners could give that advice. The advice he didn't want to hear. That was what was so important to speak to him. In Nepal, it was much more successful. We spoke to all the leaders there, the Maoists and the United Marxist-Leninists, the Congress Party, the people who at the time were supporting the king, spoke to all of them. And that was very helpful to bring peace, and Nepal will never go back to war. So that's a shining success story of peace. In Sudan, we spoke to the government of Mr. Bashir, who has been indicted by the International Criminal Court, is currently in prison in Sudan. But there was no way you could avoid speaking to him. And indeed, at the end, he accepted in a nice way that South Sudan became a separate state. I think because he understood the pressure from the international community, and people convinced him that he could survive as a political leader without that. In Myanmar, we spoke to the generals, some of them very brutal, but some of them also over some time understood that the only way to bring Myanmar out of poverty was to stop the military dictatorship and try to move towards peace. And some of them became the reform generals, which was the best period in the history of Myanmar. Unfortunately, now it's gone back to military dictatorship again. But for about 5 to 10 years, Myanmar was on the right trajectory, and particularly under some of these reform generals who understood the time for change was there. So whatever is the character of the people, you need to speak to them. Sometimes you hear very well-meaning, nice people who say you should speak to civil society groups, you should speak at universities, you should speak to the nice people, and of course you should do that also, but that can never solve the war. Because it's not the Russian people that's called for the war, only Putin has done that. The vast majority of Americans are against the war which Trump is now doing towards Iran, but still that doesn't matter. In the case in all these processes, you need to speak to the people who you do not like and who are in charge of the wars, otherwise you will come nowhere. And my last advice is always believe that peace is possible. Basically, nearly all wars end in a peace settlement. They end in a negotiated settlement. Total victory for one side is very rare in wars. It happens, but it's very rare. A messy peace is much more normal. So why don't we work so we get that peace as fast as possible with as little number of people killed, maimed, life destroyed as possible. We can find shining success examples of that. Look, last year India was attacked by terrorists from Pakistan. It was a horrible terrorist attack. India responded with 1 week of war, destroying some infrastructure, of the terrorists in Pakistan, but then calling for the end, because Prime Minister Modi knew that he could not win an all-out war with Iran. He didn't want it either. He wanted to make the case that please stop these terrorist attacks against India, but then he stopped it. And the number of people killed was, of course, then very, very low compared to the perspective now in the Iran-US war, which can be tens of thousands of deaths unless in the last-minute settlement is found. And of course, the most important of all for global peace is the relationship between the two main powers of our time, the United States of America and China. If you want to look for good news, that's currently on the side of good news. Trump is likely to go to Beijing in May. Is likely to go to the United States later this year. There are no really inconceivable difficulties between the United States and China. There are lots of people in the United States speaking negatively about China, also lots of people in China speaking negatively about the United States. But both nations can grow economically, both nations can be completely safe, and they can find ways to cooperate if they understand that they're both civilizations. United States is the epitome of the Christian Western civilization, and China is the Confucian Asian or Chinese civilization. We should always discourage about China and the West, and those who speak negatively about the West in China, because we need these two main powers to stick together. Only the United States and China can make a global war. Other nations can make regional wars. I mean, the war in Ukraine is horrible, but it's not a global war. The war in Sudan is horrible, but it's not a global war. Only a war based on China will in all likelihood be a global war. In the worst of cases, even a nuclear war, which will be close to the end of civilization. So these are, to sum it up, my main advice: go to the Rwanda, look for the main issues in any conflict, study the conflict, try to understand the other side, and understand that other people are civilizations like yourself. Look for the compromise, because without compromise we cannot survive. Engage even with criminal leaders and war leaders and terrorists and presidents who wants war. Engage with them. Always look for the peace. And it's also very useful to understand that other people tend to have many similar aspects of ourselves. The United States has struggled to win any recent war. And the reason is very simple. I mean, hardly any American want to give their life for the mountains of Afghanistan or Kandahar. Very few Americans are ready to give their life in Tehran or Isfahan or in Qom. But of course, Americans are ready to give their life from Missouri or Kansas or Oklahoma. All of them will give their life to fight for what's there to them. But this logic also applies to everyone else. Other nations are also very, very firm to defend themselves. Yesterday, I listened to a podcast with Stan McChrystal. He was the most famous, or one of the most famous American generals from Afghanistan and from Iraq, and a very, very wise man. And he said that some people tell me, he said that the new supreme leader of Iran, Mr. Khamenei, got his father and his mother and his wife killed by the Americans, and now we call on him to give in and start negotiations. And as Mr. McChrystal said, well, I would not have reacted that way. Meaning, of course, that if anyone had killed Mr. McChrystal's father and mother and wife, his first instinct would not be to make peace with those persons. And in that case, the Iranians and the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Americans and the Africans and everyone are the same. If we are under attack, we will come together and defend ourselves, but then we need all these rules to look into how we can make peace. And finally, let me end up with the greatest peacemaker of them all, Mahatma Gandhi, great Indian sage. He understood something which is of incredible importance. He, of course, understood that fighting the British Empire with military means could never succeed, because he was much, much weaker than the military empire. But his wisdom was much longer. He also understood that if he started to fight in the British Empire with military means, he would also unleash a lot of violence, which was integrated in the Indian society. And he even went further than that, understanding that if you get your freedom just by military means, rather than building upon your inner strength, well, what will come out of it will be weaker. Building the inner strength of Indian society was his main calling, and that's why he created a civilizational state, which 80 years later is one of the most peaceful in the world. It's complicated in the world. And Mahatma Gandhi said something which we can all take to heart. He said, if you need to be the change you want to see in this world, I repeat, you need to be the change you want to see in this world. And if we, and I'm sure all of you, alumni at Rotary, you want to be peacemakers, well, we need to agitate for peace everywhere, from our local community to the global scene. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the communication discussion.
Thank you so much, Erik, for sharing these reflections from your experience and from your extensive knowledge, experiences from all over the world. You highlighted that while such factors as weak states, environmental issues can create conditions for conflict, wars are often initiated, constructed by actors, by people, by what you called entrepreneurs of violence, and that conflict are shaped by decisions with a very limited understanding of local context, culture, and whether it's possible at all. And at the same time, you emphasize that compromise is essential, and it is the most major conflict today. Some form of compromise is possible, and if we seek peace, we need to engage, even with difficult actors. You said that you can talk with people, you can talk with civil society, academics, universities, but it will not resolve a war. You need to speak to people whom you don't like, yes, who are in power, who could do it. And it's always also posed question to myself, because sometimes we can have this compromise, political compromise, all kinds of compromise, but moral compromise. Sometimes it's very difficult, and we are now here in Europe, in Central Eastern Europe. We are looking at the war in Ukraine and Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we could, I don't see, it's quite challenging now here, because we could talk only about just peace, but moral compromise can be very difficult, and it's very difficult to find the solution. So I believe we can discuss it also later. And now I would like also to use this moment to move us from the lecture into a more focused discussion before going to a Q&A session and opening to all the participants. So let's focus on the limits of negotiation situations of organized violence and mass atrocities, specifically when negotiation is still possible and when it reaches its limits, including moral limits. And I would like also to invite two of my colleagues here who are from two different parts of the world, from South Asia, from Mumbai, and from Poland, from Central Eastern Europe, working also in different geographical and other contexts. So I would like to bring them to the discussion, and they prepared also questions for you. So let's start with Rukmini. Rukmini, please.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you, Erik. It was a very insightful presentation that you made, and absolutely loved the stories that you shared along the way. It was particularly fascinating to hear about your experiences in Sri Lanka, and you know, all the many little things which perhaps mattered a lot in the ecosystem of negotiating. And I'm wondering, how do you distinguish between a negotiation that's politically possible, which I guess is possible in many parts of the world? So how do you distinguish a negotiation which is politically possible from one that's genuinely sustainable in terms of its results?
Because if you take Sri Lanka as an example, the negotiated compromise was fairly clear, because the Tamil Tigers wanted a separate state. That could only come by a total military victory. If they smashed the Sri Lankan state, they could get a separate Tamil state, except that India would hardly have accepted it either, so it would be very hard. And India is the one and only important neighbor of Sri Lanka. I mean, if you can take a girlfriend in the evening from Sri Lanka and go to a cinema in India and come back the same evening. It's very, very close. But the opposite, a unitary state in Sri Lanka dominated by Sinhalese could only come as a military victory of the Sinhalese or the government, which was what ultimately happened. So the compromise was a federal state. Federal state where there will be a lot of powers for the Tamils in the northeast. They will demand powers for police, power over land, and at the end of the day, a separate unit in the northeast. So we all knew that we need to move in that direction. Why didn't we get there? For two main reasons. Mr. Prabhakaran, the leader of the Tamil Tigers, while he sometimes accepted this as the compromise at the end, he never really embraced it. He couldn't really leave the dream of a Tamil state behind him and really embrace it. The vast majority of rank and file Tamils would have been very happy with that solution. And on the other side, in Colombo, there were two main political parties. At some point, one party, the SLFP, had the president, and UNP, the other party, had the prime minister, and they were fighting tooth and nail. Very often you got the impression that they hated each other more than they hated the LTT leadership. So there was no real ability in Colombo to go for the federalism, and no real ability by the Tamil Tigers, even if deep down everyone knew that was the only negotiated settlement. And I think in that sense it's typical for a number of other conflicts. I mean, with very few words, as I indicated, where I believe the compromises must lie in Ukraine or in the US, Iran, or in Palestine, or the other conflicts. In most of these conflicts, the majority of people know approximately where the compromise will be, but still it's very, very hard for political leaders to maneuver in that direction. And there are always some excuses to prolong the conflict and do some negative acts. And there will be a lot of people who want to prolong conflicts for their own reasons, whether they want to sell weapons or whether they benefit from the war, or where they are so fanatic that they cannot accept peace, or whatever it may be. There are always people who want to destroy a compromise.
Thank you so much, Rukmini and Erik. Rafal, would like to continue?
Thank you very much, Mr. Solheim, for this really inspiring lecture. And everything you told us, of course, grows out of your many years of experience, so it has an extra value to us. You referred to World War II and the Holocaust and Hitler as an example of historical context when compromise was not possible. And that seems correct to me. I'm a member of the Never Again Association. Never Again as a motto has a universal value, but of course it is inspired by the Holocaust and the history of Poland, my country, and the history of Europe during that time. But would you agree that the positive example that you mentioned, the reconciliation, the long-term peace between France and Germany, was possible, has been possible, thanks to the Nuremberg trial, or in other words, peace was possible thanks to justice. In the circle of Rotary Peace Fellows, we often refer to the idea of positive peace. So in other words, would you agree that long-term peace, positive peace, is actually possible when justice is also a central part of the peace process? Thank you.
These are very important and great questions, and obviously there are no simple answer. But first of all, I very strongly oppose those who try to compare Hitler to any current leader. I'm no fan of Putin, but Putin is no Hitler. I'm no fan of Trump either, but Trump is no Hitler. I mean, Putin may want to take some parts of Ukraine. No one can even exclude that at some point he will attack Latvia or Estonia. But Putin has no idea of world hegemony in the way Hitler had. He had no ability to it either, even if he wanted to, but he has no such plan. Nor does Putin have any plan of wiping out an ethnic group or whatever you want to, or a religious group, like the Jews. There is no parallel between Putin and Hitler. Nor is there any real parallel between Trump and Hitler. I mean, I see some people on the left claiming that Trump is a fascist. Trump is a Trumpist. He's not a fascist. He is much more similar to the old kings or emperors of China or emperors of Rome. Some of them were evil, some of them were brilliant, but all of them had their own people, sycophants who pleased them. And they could make any personal decisions they liked. I mean, Trump interfered in every aspect of the life of Americans in a way no one before him, no president ever has done. But there are no marching troops in the streets of America. There are no SA or SS marching in the streets. No American leaders calling for genocide or any other people. So there is no real parallel between Trump or Putin or Hitler, nor is there any parallel of any other global leader. So let's leave those aside. I'm a big fan of what was achieved in Nuremberg, but unfortunately, I believe it's the exception. We have only two other similar later trials. One is in Rwanda, and the other is in former Yugoslavia with Mr. Milosevic. And all these three happened because one side had won an all-out victory. There was no compromise with Hitler, no compromise with Tojo and the Japanese leaders either. The United States and Russia, mainly these two nations, but of course supported by Poland and Norway and everyone else, but mainly the United States and Russia, they won the war against Hitler. Mr. Kagame, the present president of Rwanda, won the war. East Rwanda Patriotic Front won the war against the people who were behind the genocide, and then they could be put for a trial. And at the end of the day, Mr. Milosevic was overcome mainly by the United States in former Yugoslavia, then he could be put to trial. But nearly all other wars end with a compromise, and then there is no way you can really bring those who lose the war or into a court proceeding, because they will not accept that as the end result of a war. There are other alternatives which have been used in a number of cases, like, say, the Truth Commission in South Africa and a number of other places, which may help. I mean, in Sri Lanka, for example, my Tamil friends are really eager to have some war criminal courts against what they consider genociders in Sri Lanka. It will never happen. If anyone were to bring the Sri Lankan leaders who, yes, are responsible for the killings of thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Sri Lankans, if they were to be brought to court, they would be very popular. They will regain the popular the day after. Because the Sinhalese will say these people are accused in a non-acceptable way. They were the people who won the war. They should never be brought to court. So what can be achieved in a place like Sri Lanka is not a war criminals court like in Nuremberg, but maybe some closure, maybe to get the facts on the ground. Let's assume you are a woman in Sri Lanka who lost your husband in 2009. Yeah, if he disappeared in 2009, it's 99.9% sure he was killed. But you can, as long as there is no witnesses come forward to tell what happened, you can always, every night, believe that if someone is knocking on the door, maybe my husband is coming back, or my son, or my daughter, or whoever. And that closure, I think, would help people tremendously. But that closure can most easily happen if Sinhalese soldiers were to come forward as witnesses. Because the Sinhalese soldiers are those who witnessed what happened. The Tamils who witnessed are mostly dead. but there were lots and lots of Sinhalese soldiers witnessing atrocities. If they were to come forward to give witness, at least a lot more closure could happen. So while what happened in Nuremberg was world changing and fantastic, the way Mr. Bagasora and the other criminals of Rwanda was brought to court again was fantastic. That's not the likely outcome of many wars to the country. It's very, very unlikely outcome of most wars. There will be no trial against Mr. Trump at the end of the war in Iran, nearly whatever he does.
Thank you very much, the speaker, for responding to questions, and Rafal and Rukmini. And I just wanted to remind that this is a space, and we actually encourage everyone to have counter arguments and to have critical reflections. And I'm now reading also the chat, and there are some also comments about Trump surrounding with fascists who are moving forward with fascist programs. So your presentation, your speech, your lecture responses, they really provoke this discussion, and I think it's very important, and I believe we can find another time and when we can come again and we can continue, because I see many questions on the chat already. And yes, and Rukmini and Rafal, you will still have chance to respond if you want at the end of the session. Now, I suggest to start with the questions, and let's start with the first question because it directly links to your lecture and your concept. Connecting to limits of compromise. How can, the question is from Pauline Augsten. How can we assess the intentions of war entrepreneurs, and how can we determine where they're open to compromise? And if possible, to respond briefly because we have many questions.
I doubt that you can find an universal rule for that. It will have to depend on the context, but it's clear they cannot be compromised in the sense that you can allow people to continue killing or to continue any genocide. I mean, no compromise in Rwanda, which included the killing of one more Tutsi, could be acceptable. But or any compromise with Hitler, which included some continuation of Holocaust, could of course never been accepted. So where the limits for a compromise lies, it's not easy to say. But normally, if you can find a compromise settlement, you will save numerous lives, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of millions, if you can get a compromise.
Thank you so much. And the second question, it's very deep, I think. If most conflicts are downstream of resource competition, debt, or geopolitical proxy interest, what does mediation actually fix if those conditions remain? Are you treating symptoms?
That's an area where I believe there is a lot of room for optimism. Because during the Cold War, nearly all wars at every continent was a proxy war. When a prime example, for example, is the civil war in Angola, which in my view at the core was a war between northern and southern Angola, or between two ethnic groups of Angola. But one ethnic group happened to be declared Marxist-Leninist by the Soviet Union and Cuba, and the other tribe happened to be declared market liberalist by the United States and South Africa, the apartheid regime in South Africa. And 1 million Angolans died. 1 million. If they had been left to themselves, the war would have ended very soon with a victory for the MPLA, the party which was lately supported by the Soviet Union and Cuba, and very few people would have died. But it became a part of the Cold War, and the Soviet Union and the United States saw their interest there. And you can go on, there was not one conflict in Africa which not took this concept of Cold War conflict. The United States believed they needed to defeat communists in Guatemala and El Salvador, even if these people were just social democrats who wanted some land reform. And you can go on and go on. Every conflict in the world became a proxy conflict. Fortunately, there's nothing like that today. None of the major conflicts of today is a proxy conflict. In fact, in most of the main issues, the two main powers of the day, the United States and China, both call for peace. And they are not, I mean, they're not like the one is undermining the other by sending a lot of weapons to the other side. Sudan, yes, there are some proxy wars between maybe Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates involved in the Sudan war, but not the United States nor China. And why China take a different view from the United States on Ukraine? Ukraine cannot in any way be seen as a proxy war, nor can the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or the war in Iran be seen as proxy wars, because what you see is what you get. It's not a lot of hidden activities behind the scenes with proxies. And I mean, you also see it very, very clearly that in the case of Iran, I mean, every nation now wants to negotiate with Iran. I just saw Japan, the new so-called conservative right-wing prime minister of Iran. She wanted to negotiate with Iran to get oil to Japan. It's a completely logical decision on her side, and I fully support it. But if it was a proxy war, you would expect her to do something completely different. And India, of course, is important. Oil from Iran. Prime Minister Modi has been seen as relatively close to Israel. What does he do? I mean, he speaks to the Iranians to get oil to India. And the Iranians have accepted that all oil to India can pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So nations are acting on the basis of the national interest, not on this kind of proxy war concept of the Cold War, fortunately. And that's very, very positive, much, much better.
Thank you very much, Erik. And another question, I think it's also connected to the point I wanted to raise about moral responsibility and choice. As you mentioned, peace is more important than justice. Does that mean that compensation for lost properties and lives in conflict shouldn't be considered?
It's very, very, very rare indeed that anyone has been compensated for lost properties in war by the nation who instigated that war. The idea that Iran has made that claim in the talks that the United States should accept that it started the war and should pay compensation to Iran. I mean, all the Iranian war aims, that's the least likely to ever happen. And when this has happened, it has tended to have a very negative impact. The number one example is what happened in 1919 in the Paris Treaty after the First World War, where the United Kingdom and France said that Germany has started this war. Germany is responsible. Germany shall pay back for the evil acts and compensate us. That became one of the everyone agrees, one of the reasons why behind the Second World War. Not in a direct sense, but this gave Hitler ammunition in the struggle for power in Germany, because all Germans were opposed to this. But it was worse because no German leader could ever implement it, because a German leader needed to be elected by the people of Germany, not the people of France or the United Kingdom. And a German leader who should win a German election could never implement the policy which he was no ladies those days, which he had been forced to implement. Yes, if France and the United Kingdom had taken full control of the territory of Germany, maybe they could have done it, but they could not get any German leader to implement their policies for the simple reason that no German leader could ever be elected in Germany by implementing this reparation policy. So this is indeed, while it may be a just claim, it's indeed very, very rare, and in this case even counterproductive if the aim is long-lasting peace.
Thank you so much for your response. And another question from our colleague, Rotary Peace Fellow from Bangladesh, Monica Biswas. How can South Asian peace advocates continue a meaningful dialogue with authorities even when trust is low or political will is weak? So it's a practical and regional relevance kind of questions.
I think in the case of Bangladesh at the moment, the main issue is the relationship to India, because that has come to a very, very low point. Because as you know, the Bangladeshis, Gen Z made the revolution. Long-time leader, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, was kicked out, and she's now in some kind of safe haven in India, protected by the Indian government, and they will never give her back to Bangladesh, even if that's the claim from Bangladesh. But there is a lot of negative on both sides. There have been a lot of Indian media and Indian strong groups claiming that there's a genocide against Hindus in Bangladesh. That's not the case. There have been some very evil incidents, horrible incidents, but there's not a mass killing of Hindus in Bangladesh. On the Bangladeshi side, there's a lot of people blaming everything negative in Bangladesh on India, again, completely without any reasoning. So I think the call of the hour is for both Indians and Bangladeshis to calm down. Remember that these are two big nations which will forever be neighbors. Bangladesh has one big neighbor. Yes, it also has some other neighbors, but India is by far the biggest neighbor. One nation, 1.5 billion people, another 180 million people. It's the largest and 8th largest nation in the world. Forever they will be neighbors. Forever they have a lot more to benefit by trade, people-to-people contact, etc. So try to lower the conflict and try to don't listen to those who make claims which are not true. There is no genocide against Hindus in Bangladesh, nor is India behind any kind of negative attacks on Bangladesh.
Thank you for your response. And again, I believe we will create a second meeting and we will continue discussion on this because I believe there will be a lot of interest in continuation. And another question, so it's a different type of questions, more connected with power, with structural power constraint, from Ornella. How does one mediate when one of the conflict parties is a major power with veto capacity at the United Nations?
Yeah, this is, of course, a very, very difficult issue. First of all, the veto powers of the United Nations must be reformed. It cannot continue like that. I mean, the United Kingdom and France are veto powers at the United Nations because they were major powers in 1945 when the United Nations was formed. That time, the United Kingdom was a global empire. India was part of the United Kingdom, and so was Bangladesh and Myanmar, and even Gulf kingdoms. And half of Africa was part of the United Kingdom those days. So it was a huge power. It was logical that it got a veto power at the UN. Now the United Kingdom is a nation of a little bit more than 60 million people in north of Europe. Not even very important in Europe, because it's not part of the European Union. India is many times larger in population. The economy is bigger. Global clout is bigger. And India is a cornerstone of the Hindu civilization. So obviously, in the European Union or some European coalition of France or Germany, something like that, must represent Europe in the Security Council. India must get a seat on the Security Council, but so must Africa. By 2050, 2.5 billion people will live in Africa. By 2100, according to present predictions, I mean, close to half of global population will be in Africa. We cannot have a continued UN Security Council without African representation. India and Africa, those are the most important changes which need to happen there. Some people are opposed to the veto power. I tend to take a different view because I doubt it's at all possible to make the UN effective if a nation like the United States doesn't have veto power. To think that the UN will be able to decide and implement its policies when they're opposed by the United States is close to inconceivable. So better they have the veto power and the UN can work than the opposite. Look, China is of the 5 members of the Security Council, the member which has used veto powers less often. So let's encourage the others to work like China. Don't use it so often. But at the end of the day, a UN Security Council where a nation like the United States, and the same applies to China, will be overrun by the majority is simply not possible in today's world. Maybe in the future, in 100, 200 years, no one can know. But in this world, it simply cannot happen. And that's not just due to Trump. whoever, I mean, even if Jesus Christ or Buddha becomes next president of the United States, that person will not accept a UN veto power.
You and the next question is from another our colleague, Rotary Peace Fellow, Ilan Bas, and he actually has two questions. So probably we start with the first one. How can grassroots peace-building organization play a greater role in efforts to resolve intractable conflicts when funding for the field seems completely insufficient, especially compared to spending on security and defense? And
yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead, sorry.
No, please.
No, I mean, it's a great question. I think grassroots has a bigger opportunity to impact upon conflict today than we had in the past, because social media makes a platform where it's possible to influence in a completely new manner. It's possible to sit in a village in Maharashtra in India or in Poland or at the Makerere University of Uganda and send messages to the entire world. So, something like that was inconceivable even 25 years ago. So the possibility of influencing from civil society groups is much, much larger. I think the most important is for everyone to always try to understand other perspectives, accept that there are other perspectives, accept that compromises must be found, and try to calm down or destroy by words the voice of those who constantly call for conflict and those who are racist, those who cannot accept another religious group, those who cannot accept people from another nation. You find these two types in every place in the world. They are dangerous, but in every nation in the world, you also find the peacemakers, those who speak nicely about others, those who try to understand others, those who are Muslims and try to understand Hindu, those who are Hindus who try to understand Christians, those who are Christians who try to understand Buddhists, etc., etc.
The second question is about Taiwan. What can be done about Taiwan's status when it is such a clear red line for China, while China doesn't seem willing to accept any other outcome than reunification with China?
Look, here you need to start with the legal status, and the legal status is that Taiwan is a part of China, and that's accepted by every nation in the world. I mean, the United States has accepted it, my nation, Norway, accepted it. I mean, with the exception of a very, very small group of outliers, like maybe Guatemala, this is accepted by every nation in the world. The reason is that Taiwan was part of China historically, at least in the 1700s and 1800s. It was taken by Japan as a colony in 1895. And the idea was that in 1945, when the Second World War ended, Taiwan would go back to become a part of China. That was agreed by Churchill and Roosevelt with Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek in the Carter Conference in 1943. But then history stopped this process because of the split between the nationalists and communists in China, and there became a call by at least many people in Taiwan for Taiwan independence. This is one of the conflicts where we should aim for status quo, continue the present situation where Taiwan has a lot of independence, but it has not declared independence, not declared that it's not part of China, and where the rest of the world accept that China has a claim on Taiwan, but also the rest of the world don't want China to use military power to make that happen. But the West should also be careful, because I mean, if it was so bad that they were to come to a war on Taiwan, of course China would win that war, for the very simple reason that there are 50 million Chinese who would be ready to give their life for Taiwan. This has nothing to do, as some people believe, with the present Communist Party. Every Chinese I've ever met believe that Taiwan is a part of China. That's the confirmed view of all Chinese, and they would, in the worst of circumstances, be ready to give their life for that. If you try to put up a booth in Oklahoma City and ask Americans to give their life for Taipei, I think the queue would be very, very short. So if you are not ready, no, I have never heard of any European or American who's ready to give their life for Taipei or Kaohsiung, which is the second city in Taipei. So obviously China would win if it were to come to war. But let's, for God's sake, let's avoid it. because there are so enormous negative consequences for both China and Taiwan, but also for the entire world. And the best way of avoiding it is to continue with the present situation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to mention that also we have not only questions by comments, but comments on the chat. For example, it may be not a proxy war on both sides, but Ukraine is absolutely serving as a proxy for the United States and states in Europe. And we have one more long comment about organized historical violence, such as transatlantic slave trade, as it increasingly being recognized as a crime against humanity. So what does it tell us about the relationship between historical injustice, recognition, and negotiation? If you can explore very, very briefly.
Yeah, I mean, there can be hardly any doubt that the slave trade was one of the greatest crimes of human history. I mean, something like 15 million Africans were kidnapped in Africa and taken to the United States, but even more so to the Caribbean and to Brazil and other nations in Latin America. They never saw the home back, and many of them also were treated, nearly all of them were treated in the most horrible way. It's one of the greatest crimes of human history. How we repair is, of course, another issue. I mean, some of these African nations have suffered tremendously from that. They have been underpopulated, which is one of the reasons why they have developed much slower. I mean, Africa has developed much, much slower than Asia, and compared not just the East Asian miracles like Korea, Singapore, China, Vietnam, but South Asia has also developed much, much faster than Africa. And one reason was the underpopulation of Africa, which was caused by the slave trade as well as by harsh natural conditions, malaria, and other diseases. So this is one of the greatest tragedies, greatest crimes of human history. But what if there is any easy way to compensate? That's another issue.
Thank you so much. And there are many more questions, and I don't think we have so much time for now, but I believe we can keep all these questions and we can have a second lecture with Mr. Solheim, if you agree to meet with us once again. Just one maybe last question I can ask. It's about counter misinformation on social media that causes conflict escalation in community state. How can mediators can do, or if mediators can do something about this?
That's a very, very important issue, but I think that's also an issue where, let's call it, lay people, everyone can play a key role, because calling out these people who drive conflict is something everyone can do. Yes, negotiators can of course play a role in that, but so can basically every student or every high school person at every university in the world. Call them out. Ask why are you bringing this craziness to the world? What will you gain for that? And wouldn't the world be a lot better if you accepted some of the core messages of every religion? I mean, in Christianity, Jesus Christ says that whatever you want others to do to you, you should do to them. But similar sentences you will find in the Hindu Dharma, you will find from Buddha, you will find in Islam and every thought system in the world, because it's common sense. If I want others to be kind to me, maybe I should also try to be kind to them. So call out the conflict entrepreneurs, whoever they are, wherever they are, and try to stop or reduce the efficiency of the voice.
Thank you so much. And before I will invite my colleagues, Rukmini and Rafal, to comment, just would like to read some comments also on the chat. So there is also Jean-Baptiste Lulinda, who is a young refugee from Congo, also joining, a founder of Maria Foundation and Refugee Settlement Uganda. And he also has a question about the conflict between Democratic Republic of the Congo and neighboring Rwanda, which has been lasting for 30 years. What can we as Rotary Peace ambassadors of peace can do to bring peace in this country? But I believe it is a very big issue to discuss. If you maybe just say 1 2 sentences to respond to this, and then I can invite my colleagues also to comment.
Well, there is hardly any nation in the world which suffered more from colonialism and the craziness of the Cold War than Congo. I mean, while British and French colonialism was bad, Belgian or the colonialism of King Leopold in Congo was even worse, killing a much higher percentage of the population in the most horrible ways. Later, Congo became center stage in the Cold War. The United States, with support from Belgium and others, killed the then democratically elected leader, Mr. Lumumba, in 1960 or 61, one of those years, and installed one of the most incompetent and bad leaders in modern history, Mr. Mobutu. He was a kleptomaniac, he had stole the money of the people and didn't do any development. So the background is as bad as it can be. Because Congo now has much more decent governments, and we can only hope that we can see developments, and we should of course encourage everyone, China, the United States, Europe, and others to invest in responsible ways so that Congo can develop. But it will take time. It's an enormously big nation, 100 million people, added an enormous landmass, and hardly any roads which connect the different parts of the land. So whatever we can do to support Congo and whatever the Congolese people can do to stand up and develop fast, we must support.
Thank you, Erik. And Samako makes practical and clear-cut common sense peace-building strategies. This is from Kati Doherty, who is a Rotary Peace Fellowship Alumni Association Board President. Also, very fruitful discussion for the Venerable Lablu, who is a Buddhist monk, also working on the interfaith dialogue in conflict areas. So you see, there is a lot of interest, and we don't have, unfortunately, so much time. And I would apologize to those questions we didn't ask. And I'd like also to invite my colleagues Rukmini and Rafal to summarize and very briefly and to comment.
Thanks, Natalia, and thank you, Erik. I don't want to go into a long summary, just to say that the 5 points you mentioned, Erik, were extremely practical, and it's something that each one of us can take back into our lives, not only in the socio-political context, but also very much in interpersonal context, that they are just as relevant. I, for one, am going back with one specific reflection around messy peace being better than honorable peace where that cannot be achieved. And even as that sometimes can feel unpalatable, the practicality of it does hold a lot of wisdom. So thank you for framing it in that manner. And of course, on a logistical note, since we are at time, just want to let people know that we will share the recording and the transcript of this call in a little while with all of you. Thank you.
Well, I would like to join the words of thanks. Thank you very much indeed for this very inspiring and very thought-provoking lecture. I think many of us will be inspired to think more on the complex relationship between peace and justice that you alluded to. Also, one more thing that I noted is the issue of historical analogies that I believe can often be illuminating, but as you also said, could be simplistic or even misleading and counterproductive in the efforts towards peace. So I think that each of us took many different things in terms of inspiration, thanks to your sharing of experiences and insights. So once again, I would like to thank you in the hope that there will be a chance to continue the interaction and conversation, and so many interesting comments and questions from the chat will be posed again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafal, Rukmini. Thank you very much, Kati, and of course our speaker, Erik Solheim, for today's meeting. And we look forward to our future conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and happy to engage with you in the future. Really, so many great questions, and we can only come back to them in the future.